Hello and welcome to Arts Alive Books. My name's Jerry Smith. And joining me in the studio for this edition is local author Dino Costi, who's going to be talking about his debut novel, Venus Lionheart, The Witch and the God. Later in the show, we speak with poet and author Kevin McCann about the pros and cons of self-publishing. But first tonight, Dino Costi. His debut novel, Venus Lionheart, The Witch and the God, is inspired by fantasy, myth, legend, as well as all things spiritual. The book's been described as the point where Harry Potter meets the Da Vinci Code. Dino, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think about that as a description of your book?
I think it's pretty apt. A lot of people who've given me feedback have said it sort of has a fantasy element of Harry Potter, but also some sort of religious, spiritual elements, which sort of compare it to Da Vinci Code. In a sense, it can be quite controversial to some people, but I think that's a fitting description, yeah.
And if you sold as many copies as Harry Potter and the Da Vinci Code?
Not yet, but I'm almost there.
You'll be a happy man. We're going to talk about the book in a little bit, but first of all, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into writing.
Sure. Well, I'm from the Wirral. I was raised in Woodchurch and Morton and sort of other parts of the Wirral briefly, and I'm living in Liverpool at the moment. I sort of always wanted to be a writer ever since I was about 11 years old. I used to read fantasy literature, unsurprisingly. I sort of grew up on that and sort of turned to legends and myths, and from Greek mythology to, Arthurian legends, etc. And from there, I just sort of built up a love of literature or genres. So I ended up studying English here at Liverpool University. So I always wanted to be a writer through the whole period, but by the time I'd finished university and actually got round to the point where I wanted to write a novel, I found how difficult it can be to motivate yourself to come up with a sort of story which you think is worth telling, and then to sit down and actually go through the process of writing a book. It seems like such a big mountain to climb. It was very daunting, and unfortunately I had to put it off while I went off to get a job. It's something I sort of came back to every now and then. I would write maybe one chapter or possibly two of a book before I ended up abandoning it because I just couldn't go on. I wasn't motivated enough. And that sort of went on for a number of years. I didn't really have an alternative career. I went from job to job, whether it was, working in pubs, working in admin, etc. And it sort of wasn't until I started working as a doorman in security in Liverpool, working on bars and nightclubs. That's sort of when I got the concept for Venus Lionheart. This was about 5 years ago. And it's odd, I actually sort of came up with the idea while I was working on shifts, because although you have to be alert working as a doorman, as you'd expect, it sort of gives you a lot of thinking time, and that's when I sort of came up with the idea for the book, which I know is quite unusual. People keep saying to me, well, it's odd for a doorman to write any sort of novel, to be honest.
I'm glad you said that, not me.
Yeah, to be stereotypical, but maybe it's because of the atmosphere. Maybe it was because lively and sort of vibrant nightlife. I sort of felt the motivation to do something, and sort of came to me the concept while I was working on shifts, and then daytimes I'd sort of stop planning it, writing notes, and soon I started writing it properly, and I didn't get stuck on chapter one. I kept going, and I knew I had a good story to tell, which wasn't always the case with previous attempts. And a book that could be marketable, like you said before, Harry Potter. I mean, the potential is huge if you get it right. So I knew it could be marketable. So with this one, I stuck with it. I was motivated. It was still a long, difficult process, to be honest. I mean, it took me 4 years to write the book in the end, and there were periods during that time when I'd go months without writing anything, because, like all would-be authors know, getting that first book out is the hardest thing, because you never know what the outcome is going to be. the end is uncertain. You never know if it's going to get published or
Yeah.
if you're going to
Well,
have
in
any
fact, it's
success.
self-published, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. When I did finish it finally, after 4 years, I had another big decision to make, which was, do I get in touch with as many literary agents as I can as possible, or do I go down the self-publishing route? Now, I didn't actually know much about self-publishing. I'd heard the success stories, so people like Hugh Howey and his novel Wool was a huge success. E.L. James, 50 Shades of Grey, if you all know, was a massive success. So I knew there was potential there. And on the other hand, with getting in touch with literary agents, I was sort of put off by the idea that you can write to a huge number of them and still not actually get your cover letter, your synopsis, your sample even read by the agents. I think they have a number of assistants who look through the manuscripts they receive, and they must get hundreds a week. So I didn't fancy my chances. Even if you have an absolutely magnificent novel, one of the best novels ever, you could still not get published. So that sort of put me off going down that route. So I decided to side with self-publishing, not because I don't want an agent, but I've thought the best way to go about it is to make it a success on a smaller scale. So that's what I've been doing, trying to make a success locally, getting publicity, promotion, making sure that people can see that it is a marketable book and that children do love this book. So that's what I've been working on, and it's going well so far. And now that I think about it, I think self-publishing was the right choice for me because really with self-publishing, it allows you to write what you want to write rather than have to adhere to certain conventions that publishers have. And it can be something as trivial as, well, in the case of my book, having a girl in the lead as a lead in a fantasy for children.
Yeah.
I mean, publishers think, if it's fantasy, boys should be lead, should be lead characters. Like Harry Potter, I can't imagine would have been published if Harry Potter was a female character.
I often wonder, agents have very strong ideas about how books should be written, what they should contain. I mean, why don't they write books themselves then, and they can make lots of money with them?
Yeah.
So are you working on anything at the moment?
I'm working on the follow-up. This has potential as a series. I'm also working on a play because I do have some people in Liverpool who are in the industry, the theatrical industry. So there's a very high chance I'll be able to get a play stage in Liverpool. So
if you have got working on another volume.
Yeah.
Plot. We've already mentioned Harry Potter. It's kind of fantasy novel, isn't
Yeah.
it? That's the general territory.
Yeah, I mean, the book is about a girl, Venus, who's a sort of misfit character. She doesn't really fit in to society, what's expected of her. She doesn't bother being popular. So she goes against the grain in that sense. And then she sort of discovers that she's a witch. I mean, that's one way of putting it. She has psychic visions, which she's always had all her life. And then she discovers that it's more than just daydreaming. It's a power that she has, a gift. So that makes her feel even more of a misfit. And I guess the whole point of the book is to show how someone can use these qualities, the special qualities they have, which you think maybe make them not fit into society. How they can use them in a positive way to achieve what they want in life. And that's basically what the book's about. The story sort of takes in the Catholic Church. I guess this is where the comparison to the Da Vinci Code comes in. I wouldn't say it's anti-religious. I'd say it's more sort of anti-church or anti-authority.
People don't always appreciate that difference, the difference between the religion and the institution.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thanks very much for the moment of telling us about your book. And Dino will be back in the second half when he'll be talking about one of his favourite books, Beowulf. Welcome back. For the aspiring writer, there are many hurdles to getting a book published and out there for distribution. One method that's become increasingly popular is self-publishing, as we've just found out with Dino Costi and his debut novel. Local poet and author Kevin McCann spoke with us recently about his book on the issue.
Self-publishing, it's been described as a revolution, which I think is a very accurate description, because it's probably brought about one of the biggest changes in publishing, maybe since the invention of the printing press. Up until a few years ago, what basically happened was publishers would receive, on average, I don't know, hundreds of manuscripts a month, literally hundreds. And the vast majority of those manuscripts would be turned down, because publishers, like agents, can only take on a finite number of writers. Now, in the past, if you were a writer who got turned down, what you had to do then was go the route of self-publishing. Now, in those days, it was a very expensive process. You had to, first of all, you had to find a printer, who then you had to pay for the typesetting, you had to pay for the book design, you had to pay for a print run, usually a minimum print run, around about 500 copies. It was very expensive and often a soul destroying process, because you could end up, and people frequently did, you end up with cardboard boxes full of books under your bed, unsold and very much out of pocket. Now, what's happened since, in the last, I'd say, in about the last 10 years, is that we've got two new things have come in. One is print on demand, which means that you put together a book, you find yourself a self-publishing company that is willing to do the publishing job for you for free. Now, that's what I did in the case of this book, It's Gone Dark, a book of ghost stories that I published about 4 years ago. Now, I found an Arts Council self-publishing company called Feeder Read, and they do a thing called print on demand. Now, what that means is you send them the book over the internet, they'll help you format it, they'll give you a cover if you want one, or you can choose your own cover, as I did in this case. I used a photograph taken by my wife, Danielle. And then as people want to buy copies, they order direct from Feeder Read. Feeder Read print the copies and post them out, and they take a percentage of the cover cost. But the writer gets a much more generous royalty than they would do if it was a big publishing company. Or there is e-publishing, where you publish straight onto Kindle. Now, the big advantage in both of these is that you can publish a book at absolutely no initial cost to yourself whatsoever, which makes it a very democratic process, and it opens the whole thing out. It means now that there are far more opportunities available for writers. And it's great, it's a fantastic thing. But like all fantastic things, it's full of pitfalls. And the two biggest mistakes that get made at the beginning are impatience, and I'm sorry, I've got to say this word, vanity. Now, impatience is, I've finished, I've written the words, the end, I find a self-publishing company, I publish it. I don't need to show it to anybody because I know it's good, because all my instincts tell me it's good. Huge mistake. Once you've finished a manuscript, what you have to do then is go through it and edit it, do the rewrites, etc., etc. And then once you've got to the stage where the manuscript's ready, then you have to format it and get it published, and then you have to do marketing. So it's a very big and very daunting job. And a lot of people, when they realise how much work is involved, they shy away. Now, what I'm saying is, don't. What you can do is there are courses available. What you can also do is you can get yourself a copy of a book like this one, and this is the blatant book plug, folks, that I wrote with playwright Tom Green. Now, what we've done here is we've taken the entire process from when you think you've finished your manuscript, when you've written the end, all the way through to when you've published and it's out there and it's being marketed and you're ready to write your second book. Now, the thing is, what I've done is, my sections of the book are about how to actually improve your manuscript. I also look a bit about at cover design and so on and so forth. What Tom does, and does it very well, in a way that somebody who's technophobic like me could understand, so if I can follow it, anybody can. He takes you through, stage by stage, exactly how physically you go about publishing a book. The advantages to self-publishing are these. First of all, you have complete control over your book. You decide what it's going to be called, you decide what the cover's going to be. You will be given guidance by the self-publishing company as to how much you should charge for it. But you know, it's not something that's imposed. They usually impose a minimum charge because they have to make some money because they're providing you with a service. So that's only reasonable. But the important thing is, and I think this really is the most important thing, is that whatever happens with your book is your choice. It's not down to anybody else. It's down to you. And the reason why I mentioned impatience and the reason why you should avoid impatience is because I've seen, and it's heartbreaking, and I don't use that word lightly, it's heartbreaking to see what happens to somebody who rushes a book out in June and then by December is embarrassed to have their name on the cover. You know, the kind of book that your family and friends are polite about, but no more than that. And what I always say to people is this: writing a novel, for example, can take years. So let's say, for example, you've written a novel or you've written a collection of short stories and you've invested a year or 2 years of your life in that. Why rush at that point to get it out and then afterwards see all kinds of things wrong with it? Why not instead take the extra time, maybe the extra 6 months, to make it the best book that it can possibly be?
Dino Costi joins us again to talk about one of his favourite books, Beowulf. Unusual choice?
It can seem that way, but as I said earlier, I am interested in myths and legends, so for me it was natural to be attracted to Anglo-Saxon literature, especially having studied Norse literature at university, which is sort of similar. They have common roots, similar backgrounds, and in fact Beowulf is sort of set in Scandinavia in this sort of historical / legendary period, so there's some elements of history in it and some mostly legend, obviously with monsters featuring in it. So yeah. I've always been fascinated by this sort of this mixture of history and fiction, which sort of gets sort of melded together to create these sort of original works that I think the Anglo-Saxons and Norse were famous for. So
this is the translation by Seamus Heaney.
Yeah.
Is this the one that you favour particularly?
I favour it. It's for anyone who's put off by reading what is basically a lengthy poem. I think you'll find that this translation is really, really comfortable, really easy to read. It's sort of vernacular in some ways. It doesn't use any acronyms. It's very fluent and easy to read. So,
very approachable. Yeah. I mean, it's got one of the great first lines, I think, of any poem that I've ever read. So. It just kind of creates a whole kind of atmosphere and a kind of storytelling ambience. It's somebody sitting down around a fire just about to tell a story to children or whoever. You know, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So simple.
Yeah, well, it is sort of these sort of traditions were told orally. So this poem, the story would have probably been told by mouth by an Anglo-Saxon bard. So. Sort of gets passed down generations, and then thankfully for us, it was written down, and we get to read what's basically a great work. It's sort of it's obviously written in Old English originally. It's sort of written at a time after the Anglo-Saxons had converted to Christianity, but also quite close to the subject material, which is sort of Scandinavia around 6th century. So it's very close to what he's writing about. So what you get is this brilliant fusion of the old sort of heroic paganism of Scandinavia and the sort of new Christianity of the Anglo-Saxons. But because it's so close and it was such a gradual process of becoming Christian in England in those days, it sort of has a fusion of both the pagan and the Christian elements, which gives it this what's basically a very, very original idea of almost man's sort of the futility of living in the world, the sort of mutability of the world, how life is sort of transient and whatever we achieve all has to and all has to fail in the end. It's something that's always fascinated me, and you don't have to be you don't have to be an atheist to believe that. Even Christians, I mean, can see it that way, the way that life is, obviously with the promise of an afterlife, but something that really appeals to me.
And has it been an influence on your own book?
It has been, yeah. It's sort of, obviously the mixture of, I've always been interested in the mixture of religious, spiritual elements. Like, I'm not religious myself, but I do appreciate a spiritual side, and in no other period of history would you have had literature like this, where it can boldly talk about the sort of mortality of man and the inevitability of death, and how what we do is ultimately fruitless. So because of the time it was written, I think it allows him, the poet here, to explore that in great depth.
That's something Heaney himself is obviously interested in. And,
Yeah.
He translated a lot of Irish stuff as well.
Yeah.
And you find the same kind of scenario. You find the kind of old values of nature and kind of Celtic mythology rubbing up against the new Christian dispensation.
Right.
A lot of tension, a lot of interesting stuff as well.
There is, yeah. I mean, Beowulf himself, the character, is sort of adheres to this old heroic code. He goes to Denmark, where much of the action is set to prove his worth as a warrior, and he accomplishes that. But at the same time, there's a sense that what he does achieve is will ultimately come to nothing, because death takes us all, and what we achieve comes to an end, and that sort of builds up, particularly in this last section, which is sort of set 50 years later, when Beowulf is an elderly king, and he has one last quest to go on, which is to face a dragon. And there's a sort of sense that it's inevitable that he's going to die. Yeah. I mean, not to spoil the ending, but...
Thanks very much for coming along and talking to us about Beowulf, your favourite book, and your debut novel, Venus and Lionheart. If you have any comments or suggestions, please do contact the show at artsalive@baytvliverpool.com. We look forward to hearing from you. And see you on the next edition of Arts Alive Books. Good night.